Right. Good morning, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from Group 2. On this occasion, we want to talk about experimental research. And let's get to the first presenter. There is Azka Rivaldi. Azka, please.
Okay, Dante, thank for the time. Okay, experimental research is the most familiar type of research designed for individuals in the physical science and a host of other fields. This is mainly because experimental research is a classical scientific experiment, similar to those performed in high school science classes. Okay, I give you example. Imagine taking two samples of the same plant and exposing one of them to sunlight, while the other is kept away from sunlight. Let the plant exposed to sunlight be called sample A, while the latter is called sample B. If after the duration of the research, we find out that the sample A grows and sample B dies, even though they are both regularly wet and given the same treatment. Therefore, we can conclude that sunlight will aid growth in all similar plants. So, experimental research is research conducted with a scientific approach using two sets of variables. The first set acts as a constant, which you use to measure the differences of the second set. Quantitative research methods, for example, are experimental. If you don't have enough data to support your decisions, you must first determine the facts. Experimental research gathers the data necessary to help you make better decisions. Next slide, please. Yeah, you can also conduct experimental research in the following situations. First, time is a vital factor in stabilizing a relationship between cause and effect. Second, in a variable behavior between cause and effect. And the last, you wish to understand the importance of the cause and effect. Okay, thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, Azka, for your presentation. Next material is characteristic of experimental design will be explained by me. There are four characteristics of experimental design. The first one is control. It is variable that are not direct interest to the researchers, called extraneous variable, and it need to be controlled. Control refers to removing or minimizing the influence of such variable by several methods, such as randomization or random assignment of the subject to the groups. And the second is manipulation. Manipulation refers to a deliberate operation of the condition by the researchers. In this process, a predetermined set of conditions called independent variable or experimental variable. It is also called a treatment variable, such as variables are imposed onto the subjects of experiments. The third is observation. In experimental research, the experimenter observe the effect of the manipulation of the independent variable on dependent variable. The dependent variable, for example, may be performance or achieved in a task. And the last one is replication. Replication is a matter of conducting a number of sub-experiments instead of one experiment only, within the framework of the same experimental design. The researcher may make a multiple comparison of a number of cases of the control group and the number of cases of the experimental group. In some experimental situation, a number of control and experimental group, each consisting of equivalent subjects, are combined within a single experiment. And to the next material is validity. Will be presented by Rizgun. Is that correct? Hello.
Okay, thank you, the moderator, for giving me time. Let's continue to the another material here. This is a validity, and we have two kind of validity. The first is internal validity, and the second is external validity. So let's know about the definition. Next slide, please. Yes, the first is the definition of internal validity. Means that internal validity address the true cause of outcomes that we observe in our study. According to Campbell and Stanley, and later Cook and Campbell list 8 kind of confounding variable that can interfere with internal validity. It will be explanation later by my friend. And then the next is the definition of external validity. Here means the external validity concern the extent to which the internally valid result of a study can be held to be true for other case. For example, to different people, setting, place, or times. In another word, it is about how you apply the finding of your study to broader context. So thank you for my explanation. I give it back to moderator.
Right. Thank you very much, Rizki, for the explanation. And on to the next presenter, please.
Okay, thank you. My name is Rayhan El Jabbar, and here I will explain the traits to the validity. The first one is traits to internal validity. Next slide, please. The first one is history. History is a trait to internal validity. It refers to an event other than the independent variable that occur in or out of the experiment that may account for the result of the experiment. The second one is maturation. Maturation refers to those processes such as growing older, growing stronger, and even growing tired and impatient. Maturation will only be a problem if the design of the experiment does not identify and separate these effects. The third one is testing. Testing refers to what happens to our test performance when we practice or take a test again. Familiarity with the test could influence the performance on the second testing. Change in the final scores may be a result of repeated testing. Number 4 is instrumentation. Instrumentation simply refers to the actual change in the measuring procedure or measuring device rather than any change in the person over time. This is one of the key reasons that we use standardized informal testing procedures when conducting any type of assessment. Changing the measurements methods or their administration during a study affects what is measured. Number 5 is statistical regression, when subjects in a study are selected as participants because they scored extremely high or extremely low on some measure of performance. Retesting of the subject will almost always produce a different distribution of scores, and the average for this new distribution will be closer to the population. For example, if the chosen subject all had high score initially, the group's average on the retest will be lower than it was originally. Conversely, if group's mean was originally low, their retest mean would be higher. Number 6 is selection. The subject in comparison groups should be functionally equivalent at the beginning of a study. If they are then observed differences between the groups as measured by the performance-dependent variables at the end of the study are more likely to be caused only by the independent variable instead of organismic ones. If the comparison groups are different from one another at the beginning of the study, the result of the study are biased. Number 7 is experimental. Mortality subject drop out of studies if one comparison group experiences a higher level of subject withdrawal or mortality than other groups, then observed differences between groups become questionable, where the observed difference is produced by the independent variable or by the different dropout rates. And the next one is selection. Interaction in some studies. The selection method interacts with one or more of the other traits, biasing the study's result. Next slide, please. Thank you. The second one is straight to the external validity. Number one is selection treatment interaction. An effect found with certain kinds of subject might not apply if other kinds of subject were used. Researchers should use a large random sample of participants. Number two is setting treatment interaction. An effect found in one kind of setting may not hold if other kinds of setting were used. The third one is pretest treatment interaction. Pretest may sensitive subjects to treatment to produce an effect not generalizable to an unprotested population. Number four is subject effect. Subject attitude developed during the study may affect the generalizability of the results. Examples are the Hawthorne and the John Henry effects. Number five, experimental effects. A characteristic unique to a specific experiment may limit generalizability to situations with a different experimenter. Okay, that is all from me. I give the time back to the moderator. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Rayhan, for your presentation. On to the next presenter, please.
Hey, hello. My name is Meisya Andrianti, and I will explain the experimental research design. The first is what is experimental research design? Experimental research design is a study of determining the basic framework of information gathering activities on objectives that have variations based on statistical principles. Experimental research is a research that conducted with a scientific approach using two sets variables, and the first set acts as a constant, which you use to measure the differences of second set, and for example, are experimental. And the types of experimental design, there is three. The first is pre-experimental research design. The second is true experimental research design. And the last is quasi-experimental research design. And the way you want to classify research subjects is based on conditions or group determined by the condition and determined by the type of the design. Okay, that's all from me. I give it to the moderator.
Thank you very much, Meisya, for your presentation. On to the last presenter.
All right, thank you, moderator. Here we have the advantages and disadvantages of experimental research. The first advantages is it gives researchers a high level of control. People can manipulate the variables in experimental research to create a setting that allows them to observe the phenomena they want. They can eliminate or control other variables that may have an impact on the overall results, allowing them to focus solely on 2 or 3 variables. And the next one is it allows researchers to utilize many variations. As stated previously, when conducting experimental research studies, researchers have almost full control. This allows them to manipulate variables and utilize as many or as few variations as they want to create a testing environment without destroying the research design's validity. And the next one is it can lead to excellent results. The nature of experimental research makes it easy for researchers to understand the relationships between variables, subjects, and the setting, and also identify the causes and effects in whatever phenomenon they're investigating. Experimental research can also be easily replicated, which means that the researchers or other scientists can repeat their research to confirm the results or examine other variables. And the last one is it can be used in different fields. Experimental research is usually utilized in the medical and pharmaceutical industries to assess the effect of various treatments and drugs. It's also used in other fields like chemistry, biology, physics, engineering, electronics, agriculture, social science, and even economics. All right, here we also have the disadvantages of experimental research. The first one is it can lead to artificial situation. In many scenarios, experimental researchers manipulate variables in an attempt to replicate real-world scenarios to understand the function of drugs, gadgets, treatments, and other new discoveries. This works most of the time, but there are cases when researchers over-manipulate their variables and end up creating an artificial environment that's supposedly different from the real world. The researchers can also skew the study to fit whatever outcome they want, intentionally or unintentionally, and compromise the results of the research. And the next one is it can take a lot of time and money. Experimental research can be costly and time-consuming, especially when multiple studies are required to test each variable. And the next one is it can be affected by errors. There could be errors in the research design or methodology, as well as uncontrolled or unpredictable errors, all of which could have a massive effect on the study's outcome and force the researchers to start over. Human errors are also possible. For example, researchers may allow their personal biases to affect the study. And the last one is it might not be feasible to in some situations. There are times when the variables just cannot be manipulated or when the researchers require an enormously large amount of money to conduct the research. There are other situations where the study would violate the subject's human rights and or raise ethical issues. All right, that's all from me. I'll give it back to the moderator. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Anggita, for your explanation. We reached the end of this presentation, and thank you for all the fifth presenter. Also, thank you for your attention, and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.